Welcome to the show. My name is Purity Museonzuki. Now, Africa has 60% of the world's available arable land, and agriculture is the source of livelihood for 70% of the population. Yet, the continent generates only 10% of the global agricultural output. African agriculture is plagued by low productivity and investment, urban-biased policies, and bottlenecks preventing women's, for example, access to productive capital, including secure land tenure. Now, African agriculture also has low value addition and poor rural infrastructure. As a result, poor performance, the spectra of famine that has disappeared from other parts of the world still persist in the continent. So what could be done to ensure that African countries get value for the available resources? To unpack all this in studio, we have two experts. Dr. Shem Kuya is the Director of Research and Innovation at the JQAT, while Leonida Odongo is the founder of Haki Nawiri Africa. But before we get into a discussion this morning, let's have a look at our top stories. And Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua wants the audit of the 2022 election off the table at the ongoing dialogue between Azimio Coalition and the Kenya Kwanza government. The National Dialogue Committee is scheduled to start talks this Monday morning at Bomas of Kenya. The team is expected to table a raft of proposals that have been harmonized after submissions from both camps. Also, police in Nyeri are investigating claims by a man who surrendered to authorities claiming he killed his employer aged 70 in 2019. The murder of Stephen Ngari on October 12, 2019 in Kimahuri area remained unresolved. While Medicine Sans Frontiers says that at least 35 people have been killed after a crowded market in Sudan's capital was hit with explosive weapons. Let's get back to our conversation, where at least again we are talking matters food security in the country, and Africa is enjoying a lot of free land where at least 60% could produce a lot of food that cannot just be exported within the continent but also across other continents. But that is not happening. We still have cases of hunger, people sleeping hungry without food, and this has been normalized. So what could be done to ensure that, or to strengthen Africa's food systems? Once again, my guests are right here in studio. Next to me is Dr. Kuya from the JQAT, the Director of Innovation and Research at the institution, while Leonida Odongo is the founder of Nawiri, Haki Nawiri Africa. Thank you so much for being here. Let's begin with the basics, Dr. When you talk about food security, what exactly are we talking about, and is it possible for a country to be extremely food secure?
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you talk of food security, in the simplest term, I'm thinking about a situation where the household or the members of the household have food and they do not have fear that they will have hunger.
Yeah.
But then technically we're looking at a situation where a population or households have access to safe, nutritious foods all times to energize them to be able to get involved into productive activities. What it takes, or whether a country can be food secure, I think food security is a complex issue. It's not a simple issue, so it's a complex issue, a long-term issue. And I think all of us are aspiring to a situation where Kenya will be food secure.
Yes.
Yes.
Leonida, do we have countries, not just within the continent, maybe within the continent, that you would say that they're enjoying the food security? And this is not just about eating food, but also, like Dr. is saying, nutritious food. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. When you talk about, for me, from where I come from my perspective, working with smallholder farmers, I'd go beyond food security. I'd look at food sovereignty.
Yeah.
Food sovereignty in the sense it means farmers being, or food producers, not just agricultural producers, but also pastoralists, being able to control their food, the source of food, being able to control even the distribution, being able to control the pricing, because we know that many people sometimes cannot eat because of price volatility, and families have to, some have to undertake survival mechanisms. For example, pouring more water, a soup, because you can't afford the food is too expensive. And so when you talk only about security is the availability of the food. Yes, the food can be there. For example, I can go to a supermarket or a market. The food is available. But if I don't have money, can I afford that food? So when we talk about food sovereignty is where you're able to control even issues around distribution. Because we've had, for example, instances where one part of Kenya, people are pouring even milk, but then another part, people are going hungry.
Exactly.
And so when I can say that there is no country that is 100% food secure, because that's where the importation aspect comes in to feed into the gaps. But the culprit in terms of making food not be secure is, for example, food producers not getting the adequate support. There is the tendency of neglect of some foods. We know that foods such as sorghum, millet are considered a poor man's crop. And these are food that are highly nutritious. They are food that can actually be utilized when there is climate change. In Kenya, for example, if there is no maize, people say there's no food and people can go to the streets. And we have millet. Why aren't we consuming our millet? And this also has the narrative that can be traced to colonialism, because you see these were foods that were sustainable, but then there was the push for a cash crop economy and adoption of monoculture. And this adoption of monoculture is what has contributed to us only believing that one food like maize is the only food that we can consume. But if we're not only also looking at the nutritional value. If you look at millet and you compare it with maize, millet has is more nutrient dense compared to maize. But for a Kenyan, we believe that maize is the only food that's available.
Especially, and that's why you even and even the government has is it buying or being trapped into this kind of pressure? Is it coming from up to bottom that when you talk about food security, the first steps that you will see the government taking is, for example, reducing the price of unga. How about other commodities, for instance? So what exactly is the challenge that even when there are warning systems, the other time the Kenya Meteorological Department did warn Kenyans, they told them, you know what, you need to grow crops that are not long-term crops, but the ones that can really survive short-term, and we have them. But Kenyans and people will still go ahead and grow maize. What's the challenge? Is it lack of awareness? Is it culture? You know.
So I'll look at food security at three levels: household, national, and then international. And so when government is coming in with those measures, we should consider those as short-term to ease the pressure at the moment. But then achieving food security is a long-term thing. And there are aspects, as we say, ranging from availability, access, but then you see availability is mainly affected by production. So until we're able to produce sufficient and only top up small amount, then it becomes difficult. I would say one of the main challenge regarding that will be, especially when you're looking at the government role, then we're looking at infrastructure, we're looking at access to credit, and we're looking at training. These are some of the inputs that can go into increasing production, because there's the other aspect of the scientific aspect of improving productivity of crops, or maybe evaluating crops that are likely to perform better in certain situations. Those ones also take time to come. But then for immediate actions, what I feel is the need to educate, empower, build the capacity of the farmers and producers, and then the need to enable market, enable access to credits. For example, when we look at long-term approaches, some of the pathways that can ensure food security are ecological approaches, but those ones, they take time to deliver. And so if there is a situation of food insecurity, there is a need for the immediate measures. But for us to achieve food security in the long term, we have to identify these pathways. They need financial input. So constraints would include ranging from inadequate financing, capacities in terms of training and equipping the farmers, the extensions, and other players in the food value chain, as well as the infrastructure. She's mentioned of a situation where you have food in one region, but it cannot be transported to the other region, and therefore it will be wasted. And also aspects of just waste of food, you know? Yeah, waste of food. So it's a complex situation that requires all players to play a role.
Yeah. And one of the pillars of your organization, Leonida, is food justice. So we'll be talking about the injustices, but where would you place Kenya, because you deal with countries outside the continent and even the continent when it comes to building, all right, building the food systems? We've seen the Kenya Kwanza government, for example, trying to promise long-term, impact on the food systems, especially subsidies on fertilizers, and the president said that this is a long-term, and after a few years, for example, Kenya will be food secure. How is Kenya doing as compared to other countries, for example, whether it's within the continent or even outside?
What I can say is, if a country cannot feed its own people, then that country has problem. And as Thomas Sankara aptly put it, who controls your food controls you. And that's why it's very important for people to be food secure. What I can say about, for example, the Kenyan situation is that we have a lot of challenges. For example, when you talk about agricultural extension service, it's not functional. I work with farmers, and farmers always say that like the fuel that are available, they'll tell you we don't have fuel. These were services that were being provided in the 70s and 80s by the government. And if you do a comparative analysis between hunger in the 80s and hunger now, the situation, the number of hungry Kenyans is rising. And number of, even in urban areas, people who are hungry even in urban areas is rising, despite maybe having food in their pockets. And this is also related to the urbanization, rural-urban migration, and all that. But we can be able to resolve this, and I can give practical examples, for instance, of what we are doing with the farmers. Addition of fertilizers to your soil is not going to solve the soil infertility problem, because one is that the more fertilizers you add, the more soil component is interfered with. For example, it takes you 3 years to convert your soil from the soil that you've been using fertilizer to become soil without fertilizer. That takes you like 3 years. And in the process, pollinators, fertilizers become toxic, especially to elements such as pollinators. And they also get swept into our rivers and our water bodies. If you talk to farmers who've been using fertilizers, they say that the soil ends up having a hard pan, and so what we are doing as an organization in terms of looking at the soil, because the foundation of food production is the soil. If your soil is not healthy, then it means that even the food that you're producing is not going to be healthy. And so what we do is, as I shared before, we have what we call tafakari forums. Tafakari from the Kiswahili word to think and to reflect. So we come together with the farmers, and each farmer brings a glass of soil from their farm. And then all the farmers pour that glass of soil into a piece of paper. They look at how many earthworms can you be able to identify. And this is where we have the conversation about the importance of earthworms on your soil. And this practice is called agroecology, where you're producing food, but at the same time, you're taking care of your environment. When we use, like, for example, the fertilizers and all these chemicals, the concentration is on the yields. What about the environment? What about the other, the entire ecosystem? And so agroecology, for instance, is cheap because you train the farmers on how to do produce organically. And there's always this notion that agroecology cannot feed a large mass of people. It is very possible if you practice agroecology. It can work on a large farm. What happens is that at the onset is normally labor intensive, but when you look at it from the long-term perspective, it has a positive outcome. For example, it brings back biodiversity. You plant various crops, and these crops bring back different nutrients to your soil. They also bring back the pollinators, because if you do monocropping, let's say you've been growing one crop for 3 years, it means that even those nutrients that are being consumed by that particular crop become depleted.
Right.
But when you bring in a sense where you're planting different crops, you're also doing agroforestry, where you're also planting trees within your farm.
Yeah.
Not just any tree, but also you're planting fruit trees. So at the same time, you're having food, you're also protecting the environment, and the trees are also acting as wind breakers, and that also protects your soil from erosion, wind erosion, as well as erosion by water, because the soil becomes compact. The roots are able to hold your soil.
Yeah, and Dr. is it a lack of awareness or training or even financial support for the local farmers? Because as she said before, most of the time, if, for example, there's no maize, then there's no food in a household, irrespective of other commodities that are available in the market, and everyone will end up growing maize. The other time we had the predictions that, we are going to experience shorter rainfall season as compared to what has been happening normally. But we ended up having majority of us growing maize, and of course the harvest was not so good. Is there lack of training as far as you are concerned, or even financial support? What could be the problem?
I think the issue of focusing on different food systems or different food types is a miscommunication that has been propagated over time, and until we feel that if we have maize, then we are food secure, and also that left us to leave foods that would have helped us. So farmers really know what works. Interaction with farmers in most cases, especially when we talk about agroecological approaches, they know which crops are adapted. But then also our economy hinges on income, and some of the crops may not have that higher income at the moment, and so that also forces them to try this other high value, although maize is not a high value crop. I'm thinking about scattered efforts as one of the major reasons of unsuccessful scaling of technologies. So that even within government, there are different scattered efforts that you may not be able to see the impact. Within the development organizations, there are different people doing small things. So these efforts are not coalesced to be able to have impact. So in terms of training, yes, I would say for new emerging or adapted technologies, we need to build the capacities of farmers, because also it's not necessarily just about traditional farming systems. From where I sit, it's about identifying what can work in the current situation, especially when you talk about climate change, and then adapting that. For example, including crops, trees, or other perennials that are adapted to that, but also manage it in a way that it will produce benefits. So now the management of these new innovative approaches is what we need to build the capacity of farmers. And so training is a challenge, but also funds, because when we say agroecological approaches take longer to deliver, during that period, the farmer needs to eat, the farmer needs to meet their needs, but then we're still rebuilding the soil, the tree is still growing, and so there is need either for a mechanism that either it's an incentive or it's a mechanism that meets the need of the farmer while awaiting the benefits of this other approach. Yeah.
All right. And Leonida, for example, we have a prediction of El Nino, and this season farmers again grow. It's of course the last quarter. We headed to the last quarter of the year, and we know that people will be preparing to grow crops, but the weatherman has said that we should expect El Nino. So what should farmers be doing this time round? And he'll be talking about what should the government do, so that, because I've seen even Kenyans asking, El Nino is coming, the question of drainage systems in the city, and even what kinds of food should farmers be going for this time round when they are considering what to grow. Yeah.
Okay, the first step will be to address land use management, particularly looking at how can I design my farm such that when it rains, at least I'll have some water.
Right.
We've had instances, for example, where it rains and all the water goes to the lake, so it becomes like pointless for us. And so one of the things that perhaps every farmer ought to do is to dig something that is called swales, is where you dig you dig holes on your farm such that when the water comes, it's actually trapped on your soil and it can be used for much longer. The other thing is to do carbon beds. Basically, this is it's a permaculture strategy where you redesign your farm. You dig holes like 2 feet, and then after digging the holes, you put a lot of twigs and grass and all that, and then you mix it with soil, and then on the top layer, that's when you put the topsoil, and then you cover it with mulch. After covering it with mulch, then you plant the crops on that mulch. You pour water on the mound of soil. It can be as big as you want in terms of the area, or it can be depending on the type on the landmass that you have. Right. And then this helps to retain this water for a longer period. Even when, like, for example, you water your crops, they can actually retain that water much longer. Right. And the fact that you've covered your soil with mulch, it means that even when there is soil erosion is actually addressed. And as we all know, the most important soil is the topsoil, because as you dig deeper, you get into the rocks and this hard matter, but then it takes a long time for the topsoil to also form, and that's why it's very, very important. But then you find that during erosion, what happens? It's the topsoil that goes to the river that forms the siltation. It's the topsoil that becomes weak, that it's carried away by the wind. I think the other thing that needs to be done particularly is investment, for example, in water pans, because yes, El Nino is coming. We are not sure because it's a prediction, and so this could be part of preemptive defense. Ensuring that there are water reservoirs in place, ensuring that our land, we've managed it, prepared it in a way that when it rains, at least we'll be able to retain that water. But I'm thinking also it's important to also look at it from an emergency perspective, where are people going to get food when this we have all this deluge of water coming? And that's why I'm still emphasizing that it's very important for us to go back to our granary system, because in the past you couldn't go to a Kenyan village or an African village and live without food. But now I can come to your home and stay there, and you tell me stories for 3 hours and you don't even give me a cup of tea, because there is no food or something, or we've become individualized. We're sort of losing our African Ubuntu culture, particularly in terms of our food. But also it's linked to the narrative that is being pushed that having a granary is a symbol of being archaic, and this narrative is also affecting us, and this has made the store of farmers to be the aggravate. You ask them, where do you get your food from? I go to the market. Supposing the market closed today, exactly, where will you get food from? And that's why now for us we're having this campaign of we're doing the